Hello, this is Nathan Lindorf with the Rational Independent. Today we've got double duty from Reddit, two articles that we're going to dig into. The first one from the New Republic, shockingly, not fans of Donald Trump. Let's see what they have to say. Breaking news from Washington and beyond. Blabbering Donald Trump hands Jack Smith a key piece of evidence. Trump said something he probably shouldn't have in the Fox News town hall. Yeah, Trump says a lot of stuff, some of which he should not say. But in an odd way, because he says so much, it kind of makes him bulletproof. He says such a volume of stuff that it's difficult for any one thing to stand out. So let's see how this fair and impartial reporting goes. Donald Trump must really believe he's above the law because he continues to essentially admit to wrongdoing in the classified documents lawsuit against him. Okay, so what does admission of wrongdoing look like? Special counsel Jack Smith indicted Trump in June for hoarding classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. Pretty sure that wasn't in the indictment. Pretty sure that's editorializing. I don't think hoarding is the word. During a Fox News town hall on Tuesday, host Laura Ingraham asked Trump why he hadn't simply returned the material when the government asked him to do so. Okay, let's see what he has to say. First of all, I didn't have to hand them over, Trump said bluntly. But second of all, I would have done that. We were talking, and then all of a sudden they raided Mar-a-Lago. Okay, so in Trump speak, he kind of talks in fragments. It sounds like he just contradicted himself in the sense that he said, I didn't have to, but I would have. Yeah, I would have, but then they took him. So let's see what they have to say. I'm curious where they draw the point that this is some kind of admission of wrongdoing. The FBI raided Mar-a-Lago in August 2022 after the federal government and even Trump's own lawyers tried for months to get Trump to return hundreds of classified documents that he took with him when he left the White House. And FBI agents may not even have found all of the documents hidden at the resort. Let me just try and uneditorialize that for you. Donald Trump was instructed to secure classified documents that were at Mar-a-Lago while negotiating with the National Archives, whatever body deals with that. And so they secured them. Now, were all the secured documents located and retrieved? Maybe not, apparently. It's for news I've heard. But they weren't hidden. It's not like he's a 13-year-old boy hiding porn under his mattress. Oh, and he didn't quite get all of it. He's the president who had secured classified documents at his personal residence that had Secret Service personnel on site to maintain physical security of the premises and the documents. But we editorialize and we say, oh, maybe he has more hidden at his resort. The former president faces 41 criminal counts for willful retention of national defense information, making false statements, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, among other things. He has repeatedly insisted that he had every right to keep the documents. He does not. So this reporter has just made a finding of fact, just made a legal ruling that Donald Trump is guilty. He does not have the right to keep those documents. It's an interesting factual statement. Not really backed up by anything, just a plain assertion. These are not the droids you're looking for. Trump has also claimed, despite knowing otherwise, so you can read Trump's mind now, that the material he brought to Florida was already declassified. Trump said that being president enabled him to declassify documents at will, including just by thinking about it. This is not true. Another cool assertion, without much reasoning to it. Exactly who, let me just put it this way, rather than chasing down hypotheticals. There is not a clear-cut judicial standard that defines the limits of the president's authority to classify and declassify materials. There are examples where presidents have declassified otherwise classified information spontaneously, with no meetings, no approvals beforehand or whatever. This used to happen when George W. Bush was giving press conferences during the War on Terror. He would say something in a press conference or in a speech that was classified, and him saying it in that moment declassified it because he just took it out of classified and made it public knowledge. He doesn't get arrested for that. He doesn't get in trouble for that because he's the flippin' president. There's an argument to be made that presidents hold in their own person, in their office, plenary power to classify and declassify. So if the sitting president says this is declassified, no one else can get him in trouble for saying that. If it says this is classified, no one can get him in trouble for saying that. This is inherent to his office. Now, where Donald Trump gets himself in trouble is after he's president, he doesn't get to do that anymore. Donald Trump doesn't exactly draw these boundaries very nicely. And so sometimes he says things that gets himself in trouble, like, when I was president, I should have declassified these things, ostensibly shuffling through papers that are apparently classified. It's not a coherent standard. He's not a disciplined person or a disciplined thinker. I'm not a tremendous Trump fan, but this standard of saying that the president claimed, despite knowing otherwise, that all the material he brought to Florida was already declassified, you're making a finding of fact that you can read his mind and know that he's making a false statement against his own knowledge that documents that he took were actually classified, and he's lying in saying that they weren't. That's how bonkers crazy this reasoning is, but this is the leading narrative on the left in regards to this classified documents thing. Now Trump has given Smith even more proof that the former president had wrongfully kept classified documents. Trump's trial for hoarding classified documents, that's not what the trial is for, is set to begin in May. It's also worth noting that this article is suspiciously silent about recent revelations with the way President Biden has handled classified documents. However, this is not an apples to apples comparison. Basically, in case you were living under a rock, a special prosecutor was called in to investigate whether or not Vice President Biden, before he was president, properly handled classified documents that had been discovered in places like a university where he had an endowment, his Delaware home in the garage, and a few other places. They did an investigation, and they determined that Biden, before being elected president, kept classified documents after he was out of office, didn't handle it properly, kept recordings, handwritten notebooks that basically duplicated classified information, and then called it his own memento and kept it. This is why there are negotiations between presidents and former presidents and the National Records Office, because presidents keep their own mementos and the federal government keeps the federal government papers, and sometimes it's arguable about whether a document is personal presidential property or federal government property. That is something that must be negotiated. And Donald Trump is a negotiator, and near as I can tell, that's what he was doing with the documents in Mar-a-Lago. He made the case to the records office, these are personal papers, these are mine, I'm going to keep them. And the records office was saying, no, we want everything. But they got so aggressive that they sent the FBI to go and raid Mar-a-Lago and take the documents physically, something that has never happened with any president prior to that, even though Donald Trump is far from the first president to take documents that would otherwise be considered classified, calling them personal papers. We've gone over these rounds a lot over the last year, and we will continue to do so because this remains one of the major threats to Donald Trump's freedom as a person. These are federal criminal charges that could potentially put him in prison for the rest of his life if he is found guilty and loses on appeal. That's a problem for someone who's currently running for president. That's a problem for our republic when it comes to separation of powers, when it comes to the understanding of how the executive operates. There's some real problems, real thorny issues that need to be addressed here constitutionally. But from a lay person reading this, I see someone looking to use editorialized language to try and cast Trump in as negative of a light as possible, and suspiciously silent on the very similar behavior that Biden did, except like I said earlier, not apples to apples, apples to oranges, because what Trump did was, in a way, or at least arguably, protected by being president. That's a unique role in the U.S. government as it relates to classified documents handling. Not vice president. Vice president doesn't have that same authority. Joe Biden acted in these similar ways when he was vice president and former vice president. So in other words, he can't make the same claim that these are presidential records. He wasn't president. That's a detail that might be easy to miss because he's currently president. But the allegations against President Biden are from before 2020. But we're silent on that because it's not convenient for the New Republic to be critical of the Democrats. Shocking, I know, bias in the media. We have one more that we're going to jump on. We're going to keep it brief, but I did want to touch on it. It's not a major headline, but it is something worth considering because the topic is important and evolving. And frankly, because of something I said in a video a few days ago. So, Rolling Stone has an article. Trump's abortion plan leak inflamed his campaign and energized Democrats. Donald Trump's plan for a 16-week national abortion ban wasn't supposed to be public. Democrats are ready to pounce. I wanted to bring this up primarily because of that subheadline, because I've made the case, I think I did just yesterday, that so often in the news, if a Republican misbehaves, the story is Republican misbehavior. If a Democrat misbehaves, the story is the Republicans' response to the Democratic misbehavior. Colloquial known as Republicans pounce. So I just thought it was hilarious that the next day there's an article that literally says Democrats are ready to pounce. So I guess I've got a little crow to eat there. I guess the shoe goes both ways. Briefly touching on this issue, apparently Donald Trump is considering supporting a 16-week national abortion ban. When it comes to abortion, people come to this conversation with so much prior baggage, so many previous assumptions that it becomes very difficult to have a productive conversation. But if we're learning to rationalize our positions, it makes sense to basically lay out first premises in order to try and have a productive conversation on such a divisive topic. So, setting aside Trump for a moment, we have to understand a little bit about abortion and a little bit about the history of how we got here. So, medical science has advanced tremendously, such that unlike 100, 150 years ago, where there was no medically safe procedure for a would-be mother to have an abortion, in modern medicine, it's a routine procedure. It's something that can be done fairly easily with reasonably competent medical staff, reasonably equipped facilities. This is something that can be done, costs a few $100s, maybe $1,000 if it's complicated, or even less if you can do it through inducing an abortion through a pill, etc. I'm not saying it's morally right. I'm not saying that there aren't complications to these things. I'm saying that medical advancements has allowed abortion to be something that can be pursued by a regular woman. That was not the case 100 some odd years ago. Because of that, with the advent of birth control, with the advent of advanced medical procedures making this more practical, abortions became more common heading up to Roe versus Wade. The numbers of abortions performed year over year were increasing. Now, it was still, at the time of Roe v. Wade, it was still a situation where who was allowed to have an abortion and under what circumstances were controlled by state legislatures. In other words, the people elected by their state, those representatives, wrote laws that dictated when an abortion was and was not proper. That was the status quo. Now, the thing you have to understand is Roe v. Wade, as a Supreme Court case, essentially used constitutional authority of the Supreme Court to pull the right to legislate on this issue away from the states. Took it away from individual state decisions, brought it up to the federal level, and said, this is the standard. And all the states that are part of the federal compact have to abide by that standard, whether they agree or not. In the wake of Roe v. Wade, abortions climbed even further because now it was legal in a lot of instances throughout the U.S., through all different states. And there's some gradations and details, but that's the broad scope. Now, depending on what estimates you look at, anywhere from between 30 and 60 million abortions have occurred in the U.S. from Roe v. Wade to Dobbs. I think that's a travesty. I think that is an awful moral stain on our country. I think we're going to owe some retribution to God over that. That's just my worldview. But those are the numbers from what we can tell. Here's what Dobbs did. Dobbs reverted to the status quo prior to Roe v. Wade. Dobbs reverted the decision of whether or not abortion was proper and under what circumstances from the federal level back to the states. That's it. That's all it did. If your state banned abortion with a heartbeat bill at 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever, that was a decision by your state legislature. If you don't agree with that law, campaign in your state and change it or move. If I don't agree with California taxes, I don't call, so I do call California government names. I don't call them, if I don't agree with that state's governance, I can try and change that state's governance, or I can leave. That's the beauty of having United States, 50 laboratories of democracy, as it was called. And so you end up with a situation where people can self-select in and out of states based on the policy decisions that state makes. This gets complicated a little bit because minors can get pregnant and get other people pregnant. But minors, children under the age of 18, don't usually get to choose what state they live in. They go where their parents go. So you might have a girl who's 15 years old and she's in Alabama, and Alabama has a heartbeat bill, and maybe she has some medical complications. Maybe she doesn't know her body very well. Maybe, who knows? There's a huge amount of variation here. And she doesn't realize she's pregnant until after the abortion ban has occurred, after she's passed that deadline. That's a tough situation for that girl. Now, if it were me, speaking personally, I would counsel that girl to carry the baby to term and give it up to her for adoption. There are many, many wonderful people that want children who cannot have their own. That child deserves a chance at life, deserves a chance to live and make choices. That is a real living being with a spirit and a soul that has value and worth and needs to be protected. Since it can't speak for itself, we should speak for that child. That's how I would counsel that girl. But I'm not her parent. I'm not directly involved. I'm in another state. I can advocate that my state, which happens to be Colorado, which my state's governance does not line up with my standards at all, I should advocate within my state to change it. In a democracy, that's how this works. Public pressure over time shapes public policy to match the morals of the people. That's how it's supposed to work. If the morals of the people choose to allow the murder of babies, then that's something we have to live with and reckon with God on. We did it for 50 some odd years over Roe v. Wade. Just laying this out where I'm at. Now, let's get to where we are today. This is a political issue because it was locked in stasis at the federal level with the Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade, and it was unlocked from stasis. And now it's able to be debated again, and legislation is able to be passed again, and policy is able to shift again and reflect public will and mandates. And that means that this is a politically explosive topic. And Republicans were not properly prepared to succeed on this case. And so they ended up in a position where, in the immediate aftermath of Dobbs, Republican messaging was all over the map. Because there's a bunch of different possible ways as a country we deal with this divisive issue. One of those ways is a national ban. In other words, taking it from the states back up to the federal level, and instead of doing a federal, everyone is allowed to do this within certain parameters, i.e. Roe v. Wade through the Supreme Court, using the federal legislature to pass a national ban saying abortion is not allowed under these circumstances, to be restrictive. There are pros and cons to that policy. Personally, I'm actually not a fan of that. I think abortion is murder. I don't think a national ban on abortion is the right way to reckon with this issue. I think the states are right to legislate it. I think it is right to let people self-select what kind of society they want to live in, And over time, I hope we as a people can make the moral choice to make better choices so abortions are not required so often. Because whether or not you want to admit it, abortion, chemical and otherwise, is essentially, in a lot of cases, used as a form of backup contraception. You're not ready to make a baby, but you want to have sex. So you have sex and you figure, if I end up with a baby, I have an out. That's a moral stance. If that's your moral stance, you're going to have to reckon with. That's a problem. Donald Trump apparently had a plan to support a 16-week national abortion ban. The interesting thing is, this position gets him kicked from both sides. There are some parts of the Republican Party that say we should not do a national ban. There are other parts of the Republican Party that say we should do a 12-week ban, an 8-week ban, a heartbeat ban. We should lock everything down at the federal level. So if you pick a middle-of-the-road option, you're going to get kicked by the extremists on both sides, and that appears to be what's happening. So what this leads a political animal to do, this kind of fallout, is to back away from this issue and say, I don't want to get kicked from both sides of my base, so I don't want to take a strong stance here, because that will put me in a position where it might damage my efforts politically. And Republicans have had some electoral challenges since Dobbs passed, and a lot of people are pointing to say abortion was part of the reason why Republicans are having a more difficult time getting elected. That's partially a political calculation, but I don't think it captures the whole picture. You have so much pent-up rage and emotion and concern and fear on this issue because it has been removed from the public policy discussion for so long, for generations, that reinserting it back into the conversation is going to cause turbulence and chaos. And we're going to need to adapt to that as a polity. So I wanted to just kind of touch bases on this, briefly cover the topic of abortion, and explain my perspective that says I think it's best that we keep this in the public discussion, public policy discussion. We leave it at a state level, and we let this country decide what kind of moral character it wants to have. And then once this matures a little bit, then we see where we're at. This is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent. Good luck out there.